Have you ever noticed that people who learn English for a long time often start seeing the world differently? Almost like their mind slowly becomes bigger. Hello, my amazing students, and welcome again to your channel. My name is Clara, and today we're going to talk about something very interesting, something deeper than grammar, vocabulary, or pronunciation. We're going to talk about how learning English can slowly change the way you think, because language learning is not only about communication, it's also about exposure, new ideas, new cultures, new perspectives. And when your brain experiences different ways of thinking, something inside you begins to expand. So today, we're going to explore why many English learners become more open-minded and how learning a language can quietly transform your mindset, confidence, and understanding of the world. There's something very interesting about language. It doesn't only help you communicate with other people, it changes the way your brain experiences the world. And most people don't realize this while they're learning English. At first, everything feels technical. Vocabulary, grammar, listening practice, pronunciation. But slowly, something deeper starts happening. You begin seeing beyond your own environment, beyond your own habits, beyond the way you've always thought. And that shift changes you. Now let's think about this honestly. Every language carries a different way of expressing ideas, different humor, different emotions, different communication styles, different perspectives about life. So when you learn English, you're not only learning words, you're entering a completely new mental space. And exposure to new perspectives naturally expands the mind. Now here's something very important psychologically. Human beings become mentally limited when they only experience one perspective repeatedly. Same environment, same opinions, same cultural patterns. The brain becomes comfortable there. But language learning interrupts that comfort because suddenly you start hearing people think differently, express emotions differently, solve problems differently, and your brain begins adapting. Now let's make this practical. Imagine someone who only consumes information in one language. Their access to ideas is naturally limited. Not because they are less intelligent, but because their exposure is smaller. Now compare that to someone learning English. That person suddenly gains access to international podcasts, global discussions, different cultures, different philosophies, different lifestyles, different ways of thinking. And all of that slowly changes how they see the world. Now here's something deeper. Open-mindedness is often created through exposure, not force. Not lectures, exposure. When your brain repeatedly sees different perspectives, it becomes less rigid, less judgmental, more curious, and curiosity changes personality. Now let's talk about communication. People who learn English often become better listeners too. Why? Because understanding another language requires patience, attention, flexibility. You learn to tolerate confusion temporarily, and that skill becomes emotional flexibility in real life too. Now imagine someone who has spent years listening carefully to another language, trying to understand different accents, different cultures, different communication styles. That person often becomes more adaptable socially, because adaptability is being trained constantly. Now here's something very emotional. Many people begin learning English for practical reasons: work, school, travel. But later, they realize something unexpected happened. Their world became bigger. Not physically, mentally. They became more curious, more open to new experiences, more connected to people outside their own culture. That transformation is powerful. Now, let's go deeper psychologically. When you understand only one world, you often believe your way is the normal way. But when you learn another language, you discover many different ways to live, think, communicate, and express emotion. And suddenly, your brain becomes less absolute, more flexible. That flexibility is one of the most valuable mental skills in modern life. Now, let's connect this to English specifically. Because English is a global language, it exposes learners to people from everywhere. Different countries, different personalities, different ideas. And over time, that exposure naturally increases empathy. You become better at understanding perspectives different from your own. Now, here's something interesting. The more perspectives your brain experiences, the harder it becomes to think in extreme ways. Because complexity enters your thinking, you begin realizing, the world is bigger than my personal experience. And that realization creates maturity. Now imagine yourself years from now. You understand English naturally. You can communicate with people globally. You consume information from many cultures. You think more openly, more calmly, more flexibly. That transformation didn't happen in one moment. It happened slowly, through repeated exposure to another language and another world. Now here's the key idea. English learning is not only improving your communication, it's expanding your mind. Because every new language introduces new perspectives, and perspective changes identity. There's another change that happens quietly when people learn English for a long time. And honestly, it has nothing to do with grammar. It's confidence. Not loud confidence, not fake confidence, real confidence. The kind that slowly grows because you keep doing difficult things and surviving them. Now think about what language learning really requires. You make mistakes publicly. You struggle to express ideas. You feel misunderstood sometimes. You hear yourself sounding imperfect. And despite all of that, you continue. That process changes people psychologically, because every time you survive discomfort, your brain becomes stronger. Now here's something important. Most people avoid situations where they might look bad. They avoid mistakes, embarrassment, confusion. But English learners experience those things regularly, and over time, they become less afraid of them. That's powerful. Because confidence is not built by always feeling comfortable. It's built by realizing, I can handle discomfort and still continue. Now let's make this practical. Imagine someone who was once terrified to say one sentence in English. Their heart races, their mind freezes, they overthink every word, but they continue practicing. Months later, they can hold conversations. Not perfectly, but naturally. That experience changes self-perception, because now the brain has evidence. I can grow. I can improve. I can adapt. And those beliefs affect life far beyond English. Now here's something deeper. English learners also become socially adaptable. Why? Because language learning trains flexibility. You constantly adjust. Your pronunciation, your listening, your speaking speed, your communication style. Your brain becomes used to adaptation, and adaptable people usually connect with others more easily. Now imagine communicating with people from different countries, different accents, different cultures, different personalities. That experience teaches social awareness naturally. You learn to listen more carefully, observe more, judge less quickly, and that creates emotional intelligence. Now here's something very interesting psychologically. People become more open socially when they stop fearing mistakes. And English learners slowly train that skill. Because eventually, you realize communication matters more than perfection. And once you stop obsessing over perfection, you relax. You become more expressive, more authentic. Now let's go deeper. Learning another language also creates humility. Because no matter how intelligent you are, you become a beginner again. You struggle again. You misunderstand again. And that experience often makes people more patient with others too, because they remember what confusion feels like. Now here's something emotional. Many English learners underestimate how brave they actually are. Seriously, because learning another language requires repeated vulnerability. You repeatedly enter situations where you are not fully comfortable. And most people avoid that, but learners continue anyway. That builds courage quietly. Now imagine someone after years of language learning. Not only can they communicate in another language, they also became more patient, more adaptable, more confident, more understanding, more socially flexible. That transformation is bigger than fluency itself. Now let's connect this to modern life. The world today rewards adaptability more than ever. People constantly face new systems, new technologies, new environments. And people who adapt socially and mentally usually grow faster. Language learners train that ability continuously. Now here's another powerful point. When you learn English, you also become less afraid of not knowing. Because you experience confusion regularly and learn how to move through it, that skill becomes extremely valuable in life, especially in a world changing rapidly through technology and AI. Now imagine yourself in the future. You enter conversations more confidently. You connect with different types of people. You adapt faster to new situations. Not because you became perfect, but because learning English trained your mind to stay flexible. That's the hidden transformation. Now here's the key idea for this part. English learners often become more open-minded because they repeatedly practice adaptation, vulnerability, and communication. And those experiences slowly reshape identity, not only as learners, but as people. There's something invisible that happens when people stay inside only one mental environment for too long. Their thinking becomes smaller, not because they are unintelligent, but because the brain naturally builds limits around what it experiences repeatedly. And this is where learning English becomes powerful in a completely different way, because English often breaks mental walls people didn't even realize they had. Now let's think about this honestly. Most people grow up hearing the same ideas again and again. Same opinions, same cultural habits, same way of seeing success, life, communication, and possibility. And after years, those ideas start feeling absolute, like, this is just how life works. But then something interesting happens when you learn English. You suddenly enter a much larger world. You hear different people talking about life differently, different goals, different lifestyles, different perspectives about happiness, work, relationships, confidence, creativity, and success. And slowly, your brain realizes something important. There are many ways to live. That realization changes everything. Now here's something psychological. The brain creates possibility based on exposure. If you never see something, your brain rarely imagines it. But exposure expands imagination, and English dramatically increases exposure. Now let's make this practical. Imagine someone who only consumes local content all their life. Their perspective naturally stays limited to what surrounds them. Now compare that to someone who understands English. That person can suddenly access global podcasts, interviews, books, ideas from different cultures, stories from people with completely different lives. And those experiences slowly expand what feels possible. Now here's something powerful. When people begin seeing more possibilities, their identity starts changing too. Because identity is connected to imagination. You cannot become something your brain cannot imagine clearly. But exposure creates imagination. Now let's go deeper. English learners often begin questioning old limitations, not aggressively, naturally. Because once your brain experiences different perspectives, you stop assuming your environment is the only reality, and that creates mental freedom. Now here's something very emotional. Some people spend their entire lives inside invisible mental walls. Walls built from limited exposure, limited communication, limited perspective. And they don't even realize those walls exist until something expands their world. For many people, English becomes that expansion. Now let's talk about fear for a second. Fear often grows inside limited environments because the unknown feels dangerous. But exposure reduces fear. When your brain repeatedly experiences different people, cultures, and ideas, it becomes less reactive, more calm, more understanding. And understanding creates openness. Now imagine someone learning English for years. They hear different accents, different communication styles, different ways of thinking. Eventually, their brain becomes more flexible naturally, not because someone forced them to be open-minded, but because exposure trained openness. Now, here's another important point. English also changes ambition, because when people see larger possibilities, their goals often expand too. Maybe they start imagining travel, remote work, international friendships, creating content, learning new skills, building something bigger. And that shift begins with perspective. Now, here's something deeper psychologically. Many limitations are not physical, they are mental. And mental limitations often come from repeated exposure to the same narrow environment. But language learning interrupts repetition. It introduces variety, complexity, perspective, and the brain grows through complexity. Now imagine yourself years from now. You consume information globally. You understand different viewpoints. You communicate with people from many cultures. You no longer see the world through one narrow lens. That transformation affects every part of life, not only English. Now let's connect this to modern society. The future belongs increasingly to people who can understand complexity, people who can communicate across cultures, people who can adapt mentally, and language learning trains exactly those skills. Now here's the final idea for this part. English learners often become more open-minded because English expands exposure, and exposure expands possibility. And when possibility expands, so does identity. There's another transformation that happens during language learning. And honestly, many people don't notice it until much later. Emotional strength. Because learning English is not only training your brain, it's training your emotional resilience too. Now think about what language learning actually feels like sometimes. Confusing, slow, uncomfortable. You misunderstand things. You struggle to express yourself. You compare yourself to fluent speakers. You feel behind. And despite all of that, you continue. That process quietly builds emotional strength. Now, here's something important. Most people only feel confident when they are already good at something. But English learners spend long periods existing in uncertainty, and that changes the brain. Because slowly, you become more comfortable not knowing everything immediately. And that skill is extremely powerful in life. Now, let's go deeper. When people first begin learning English, many feel emotionally dependent. Dependent on translations, dependent on subtitles, dependent on other people helping them understand. But over time, something changes. They become more independent mentally. They can search for information themselves, learn directly, understand directly, communicate directly. And that independence changes confidence deeply. Now imagine someone who once felt completely disconnected from global communication. Later, they travel more confidently, use technology more comfortably, learn online independently, understand conversations naturally. That transformation feels bigger than language because it changes the relationship they have with the world. Now, here's something psychological. The brain becomes stronger when it repeatedly survives manageable difficulty. Not extreme stress, manageable challenge. And English learning creates exactly that kind of challenge. Small discomfort, repeated often. Over time, that builds resilience. Now, let's make this practical. Think about how many times an English learner experiences frustration, not understanding a sentence, forgetting words, mispronouncing something, feeling slow. And yet, they keep trying. That repeated recovery process trains emotional endurance. Now, here's something deeper. People who recover repeatedly from small struggles often become less afraid of future challenges because their brain learns difficulty is temporary, confusion is survivable, progress happens gradually. Those beliefs become emotional strength. Now, let's connect this to open-mindedness. Emotionally fragile people often resist new perspectives. Why? Because uncertainty feels threatening. But emotionally resilient people tolerate uncertainty better, and language learners train that tolerance constantly. That's why many learners slowly become calmer and more flexible psychologically. Now, here's something very emotional. Sometimes people begin learning English thinking they are only improving a skill, but years later, they realize they became stronger emotionally too. More patient, more adaptable, more independent, more capable of handling discomfort. That transformation changes life far beyond communication. Now imagine someone learning English over many years. At first, they are afraid to speak, afraid to make mistakes, afraid to sound imperfect. But slowly, they stop fearing imperfection so much, and that freedom changes personality. Because perfectionism creates fear, but repeated practice reduces it. Now here's another important point. English learners also become more independent thinkers, because once you understand another language, you no longer depend completely on filtered information. You can explore ideas directly, research directly, learn directly, and direct access creates intellectual independence. Now let's connect this to modern life. The future will reward emotionally adaptable people. People who can learn continuously, handle uncertainty, adjust to change, and language learning quietly trains all those abilities. Now imagine yourself years from now. You handle confusion more calmly. You adapt to new environments more easily. You communicate more confidently. You feel less afraid of the unknown. That version of you was not created instantly. It was built slowly, through thousands of small moments of learning, struggling, recovering, and continuing. Now here's the key idea for this part. Learning English often makes people emotionally stronger because it repeatedly trains resilience, adaptability, and independence. And those qualities naturally create a more open and flexible mind.